like to welcome all of you to the UCSD Medical Center and this talk by Dr. Jon Kabat-Zinn entitled Coming to Our Senses. The talk is sponsored by the UCSD Center for Mindfulness in the Department of Psychiatry here at UCSD. My name is Dr. Steve Hickman. I'm a clinical psychologist here in the department and the director of the UCSD Center for Mindfulness. And I can't tell you how surreal it is to say that, standing up here in this room of all places, in front of all of you and this man of all people. Because 1996, my second year of graduate school, my first clinical rotation happened to be here at UCSD in inpatient psychiatry, and one of my bosses said, "Oh, you should go to this Grand Rounds presentation. I think you'll find it interesting." And I didn't really pick up on the details, but I went because I could get the message I was supposed to go. So I went. And I sat somewhere over there and started listening to this guy talking about mindfulness and meditation and mindfulness-based stress reduction and yoga of all things. And I thought, well, this is kind of unique in this setting to be hearing about all of this stuff. But it's not for me necessarily. And I sat a little bit longer, and then he started talking about a study that they had done with psoriasis patients. And my ears perked up, not because I had any particular interest in that, but I have a colleague who was. And I thought, well, maybe, I'll at least copy down something and this hour won't be a total loss. This guy that was talking was this Kabat-Zinn guy. And I remember writing down the name because I wasn't sure I was going to remember it. So little did I know. And so at the end of that, one of the things was, as a second-year student, I was very critical in thinking about what was wrong with the study, and how I would have done it differently, and all of those sorts of things. What were the shortcomings and all of that. And we got to the end, and I was sitting there, and I could tell you for sure that there were two things that I knew for absolute sure in the world at that point. One of them was that this meditation stuff was not for me. And not only not for me personally, but certainly not something that I would do when I was a psychologist, a scientist of all things, to be teaching my patients things like yoga and meditation. The other thing that I was quite certain of was that in a couple of months my rotation here at UCSD would end, and that would be the last time I would set my foot here as a professional. So that tells you a little bit about, questioning the things that you know, given my introduction. And there's probably something there that dovetails nicely with John's talk and his book. So at the risk of further expounding on things that I think I know, I'd like to tell you a few things that I know about Jon Kabat-Zinn. He earned his PhD from MIT and went on rather incongruously to establish the Stress Reduction Relaxation Program at the University of Massachusetts Medical Center, Medical School. And that program formed the core of what now is considered the UMass Center for Mindfulness. And over the last 20-some years, he and his colleagues have trained thousands of people in mindfulness-based stress reduction, MBSR, in a variety of settings, from the hospital-based clinic to prisons to the inner city to corporate environments and everything in between. Also establishing a very extensive training program for people like me who wanted to teach mindfulness-based stress reduction, and have trained probably literally thousands of people who are now teaching MBSR all across the country and around the world. He's also a scientist and a co-author of many studies regarding mindfulness and mindfulness-based stress reduction, an author of books, The Full Catastrophe Living, Wherever You Go, There You Are, co-author with his wife Mila of Everyday Blessings on mindful parenting, and most recently his newest book, Coming to Our Senses, which is the title of the talk today. As I mentioned, he's a husband, he's a father, he's a son. And so those are some of the roles and some of the things that he's done, but we recognize when we look at ourselves that we are much more than the things that we have done and the roles that we have. And so I just want to say a little bit about who I know John to be. In my interactions with him, talking with him on the phone and in person, and hearing him speak and reading his work, I know him to be a passionate and compassionate individual who is highly articulate and intelligent and sensitive, and is able to look deeply at some important things, some universal things, and articulate those things in a way that touches people in profound ways. I think two things in particular stand out for me about John. the first one is that this is a guy who practices what he preaches, and you know that when you interact with him, and you see that in his dedication to his work, and especially, in my experience, in his dedication, his generosity with his time and attention with people interested in learning about mindfulness and teaching it and researching it. The other thing that I know about Jon is something I don't think I've heard him say necessarily, but in all the hoopla, you know, with the books and a book tour and publicity and being featured on Bill Moyer's Healing in the Mind years ago, and all of the teaching and speaking and all of that sort of stuff, it's never been the Jon Kabat-Zinn show. Because what he's talking about and what he's looking deeply at is something much bigger than one individual. And that's why it touches us so deeply and profoundly. And that's touched me a great deal. And so I like to think about Jon actually as the ultimate matchmaker, if you will. In that all of the work that he does introduces or reintroduces each one of us to our very own lives. And in the words of a matchmaker, we were made for each other. So it gives me a great joy and pride to have the opportunity to introduce or reintroduce each one of you to Dr. Jon Kabat-Zinn.
Well, thank you, Steve, for that lyrical and beautiful, heartfelt introduction. And I'm very touched to be here, and I remember very, very clearly being in this room the last time. I'm not sure why, because I'm in a lot of rooms like this, but I've always had a deep sort of affiliation with San Diego. I mean, there's something about this place that's just insanely beautiful. At least coming from the outside. And so I'm just delighted to be here, and also very moved at the level of interest that has developed over the years that is in some way diagnostic of everything that Stephen was telling me about. I mean, he came to a lecture, you know, without any interest whatsoever in this, left the lecture without any interest in it whatsoever, and wound up committing his life to it. It's tricky business. And so you have to be very careful how close you want to come to this stuff, because it does have that feature of reintroducing you to yourself. So I thought maybe I would start with a couple of poems that you see, it's like I walk into the room and I think, oh, maybe, God, look at all these people. Maybe I should give them a PowerPoint presentation. You know, and I spend a huge amount of time trying to develop PowerPoint presentations that don't put people to sleep. Because, you know, if I could give you like a brief encapsulation of mindfulness, it's about falling awake. We're masters of falling asleep. We do it every night, and through most of the day, too. At least on autopilot or semi-asleep. But falling awake, that's a challenge, and in some way requires cultivating a certain kind of intimacy. In fact, that's a fairly good definition of mindfulness, is cultivating a certain kind of intimacy with the core of our own being. Well, who's got time for that? So, in terms of the connectivity, you know, I noticed Steve shutting off his cell phone, and I suggest you all do the same, and I'm going to do the same too. But, you know, sometimes I like to joke that, you know, we're now living in an age of, how many of you have one of these on your body, just or in your purse? It's like, yeah. Pretty soon they'll be implanted. It'll be much more convenient that way. So we're living in an era that was like science fiction even 20 years ago. Absolute science fiction. And this is just one symptom of it. And nobody would throw this away. I mean, it's got incredible value in many, many ways, and it really helps us in this era of what is called 24/7 connectivity. Okay? But have you ever had the feeling that, you know, it's 24/7 connectivity, but who are we ourselves? Are we connecting with ourselves at all? Or who's got time? And maybe ultimately we'll have to pay Verizon to call ourselves up. Hello, John, are you there? Well, that's actually a koan in the Zen tradition, is that ask yourself, are you here? And then it becomes really interesting to ask who's asking the question and who's answering. Or what it means when we use the personal pronouns like I, me, and mine. And so, there's a sort of basic level at which we operate in the world without paying very much attention to who we actually are. And, and when you get really angry at somebody, this often happens in families, to children, who do you think you are? Who do you think you are? Don't ask me. I don't know. It's like, your guess is as good as mine. It's like, it's a non-trivial question. Who are you? And it's not who you think you are, no matter what you think. So it becomes really interesting and also profoundly terrifying. So most of us don't want to go anywhere near that for our lifetime because, it's taken a lot of work to get it all together and, expensive to educate ourselves and to train and everything else. And if all of a sudden we start to question, like, who we actually are, all of that might go by the boards and, let's not go there. So here's Emily Dickinson on the subject of fragmentation, of splitting apart. Have you ever had the feeling that you were like splitting apart, that your life was fragmented, that you really wanted to go there, but you had to be here? Or you really wanted to be here, but you had to go there? And we often have, adopt the phrase, I'm of two minds on that one. And usually two minds that neither of which are at peace. Two minds like at war. Have you ever felt at war with yourself or in conflict with yourself? And you can begin to see, just from the tone of my comments, that I'm not just talking about our patients. How many of you are physicians or health providers of one kind or another, psychologists? You raise your hands. Okay. Oh, and then there are a lot of other people here, too. Wonderful. Well, this is an equal opportunity talk. Mindfulness is an equal opportunity engagement. It's like, doesn't matter what your role, status, professional training, or anything else are. If you have a body and you have a mind, it may be relevant. But it might also be terrifying. And I want to put that right out front because, we call what we do, as you heard, mindfulness-based stress reduction, but we tell our patients right off the bat, look, it may sound like stress reduction, but it's stressful to take the stress reduction program. And in fact, we see this as the hardest work in the world. It's the hardest work in the world to be who we actually are when we hardly know who or what that is. But examination of it, it was Aristotle who said, and maybe he was quoting Plato, I don't know, but it was Aristotle, at least the way I heard it, who said the unexamined life is not worth living. And the question is, well, what would be the lenses through which we do the examining? Because if it's only through thought, and through opinionated thought, to boot, or driven by emotions like fear, then the examination itself might be seriously skewed or tainted. And we might come up with all sorts of ideas about who we were that were actually not true, but we can live forever in the story of me and completely adjust and fabricate stories of me and who I am and where I'm going and how great it will be when I get there and all of the things that are potential impediments, and I have to push them away and go towards what I want and basically be always ahead of ourselves or on the way to. And what mindfulness is saying, there are no on the way to moments. There are no on the way to moments. This is it. If you're not here for this moment of your life, you've missed this moment of your life. It's that simple. And what would it even mean to be here for this moment of your life? Well, that's a whole universe. And maybe we'll enter into it. Let's enter into it first through poetry. So with Emily Dickinson, you have to listen very, very carefully because no one ever wrote like her before or since. And so I would suggest you listen with your bones. not just with your head or even with your ears. Listen with your whole being. Me from myself to banish, had I art, impregnable my fortress unto all heart. But since myself assault me, how have I peace except by subjugating consciousness? And since we're mutual monarch, how this be except by abdication, me of me? Can you feel it? Now, if you sort of just instantaneously scan back over your life with huge open-heartedness and self-compassion, do any moments come to mind where you abdicated something deep within yourself? Are there any times during your day that you feel fragmented and, this and that, wanting this and that, fearing this or that, and getting caught on the horns of a dualism, a dilemma? So Steve was saying that both the danger and the beauty of this practice is that it could actually reintroduce you to yourself. So, and Emily Dickinson, as you know, was very badly wounded in love, and she wanted to make her heart, no longer vulnerable. Impregnable my fortress unto all heart feelings. And then realize, but since myself assault me, how have I peace except by subjugating consciousness, which is what we do most of the time. That's what automatic pilot is. We just deny, suppress, repress, don't pay attention, distract ourselves, and we call that, we call entertainment diversion. We divert ourselves like a river. We have a true course, we divert it. We do that all the time. Just check out, become mindful, if you will. Here's an invitation for your homework. See how many times during the day you interrupt yourself. And then she realizes, but since we're mutual monarch, in other words, we're actually one, how this be except by abdication, me of me? Can you feel the pain in that? Can you feel the way in which that in a way is a betrayal of ourselves and our possibilities out of perfectly natural desire to not be hurt anymore, to not have to suffer. And we're all, sort of to a large extent driven without being aware of it because we have subjugated consciousness. How much of the time we're running from pain, discomfort, and towards pleasure, satisfaction, all of which is a fabrication of the mind. So if we can examine how much the mind likes and dislikes different things under a sort of microscope of dispassionate, moment-to-moment, non-judging attention, it's unbelievably revealing. And one of the things that it does is it does give your life back to you, and it also is freeing, is liberative. That's why in the Buddhist tradition, which is mindfulness is often spoken of as the heart of Buddhist meditation, but you have to understand it's not Buddhist. It doesn't have to do with Buddhism any more than, the law of gravity has to do with Italian, because Galileo happened to be Italian, or English because Newton happened to be English. If there's some universal element here that has to do with attention and awareness, then where it comes from is not of primary importance. It's like what its value is, may be. And that value can only be had through tasting for ourselves. And so here's another poem by Derek Walcott, who some of you may know. He's from the island of St. Lucia, African extraction, Nobel laureate in literature, teaches at many U.S. colleges and universities. And this poem is called Love After Love. Again, listen carefully and keep Emily Dickinson in mind. The time will come when, with elation, you will greet yourself arriving at your own door, in your own mirror. And each will smile at the other's welcome and say, sit here, eat. You will love again the stranger who was yourself. Give wine, give bread, give back your heart to yourself, to the stranger who has loved you all your life, whom you have ignored for another. To the stranger who has loved you all your life, whom you have ignored for another, who knows you by heart. Take down the love letters from the bookshelf, the photographs, the desperate notes. Peel your own image from the mirror. Sit. Feast on your life. You will love again the stranger who was yourself. I think that's what Steve was talking about. This can happen. And if there's any sense that you have no idea what I'm talking about, then, you're probably going to suffer a lot for the next half hour until this talk is over. And that, you know what? And that's perfectly fine. Both that you suffer or that you leave, because it doesn't really matter. What matters is only that we be true to ourselves in the only moment we ever have, which is this moment. And you might ask, from any perspective at all, including a scientific perspective, how do we know anything? How do we know anything? Well, all scientific instrumentation is an extension of the senses. If you want to know what's going on back in time, at the era, approaching the Big Bang, what do? You build gigantic radio telescopes. And you turn them towards the heavens, and we use the term, we listen. But we're not listening like with our ears. Those big telescopes are extensions of our ears into wavelengths of ultraviolet radiation that we're not sensate to. So all scientific instrumentation, including PET scans, fMRIs, spectrophotometers, even balances, even scales, telescopes, microscopes, tunneling microscopes, they're all extensions of the senses. Now, how many senses are there? Well, that's an interesting question. In the textbooks, it says 5. Maybe, I haven't read any of these textbooks in a while, so maybe it says more than 5 now. The Buddhists would say, classically, 6. Okay? There's seeing, smelling, tasting, touching, and hearing. Okay? And then there's what they would call knowing. The mind, for shorthand, okay? The mind. Okay? Because without this non-conceptual aspect of mind that is kind of a direct knowing, that may involve thought, but it's not completely constrained by thought, we wouldn't know what we were seeing. The eyes by themselves don't know. The ear by itself doesn't know. So what do we mean by mind? Well, even, and I think, I have to say this when I'm in the San Diego, La Jolla area, because, Sir Francis Crick of Watson and Crick fame. Watson, by the way, got his PhD with my thesis advisor, Salvador Luria, in molecular biology. And Watson was Luria's first graduate student. And sometimes, when I was bringing up these kinds of issues with Salvador Luria, and when I was in his lab, he would say to me, Jim Watson was my first graduate student, and you're going to be my last graduate student. But his compatriot Frick, not compatriot, he was English, Crick, who died not too long ago, he wrote a whole book called The Astonishing Hypothesis some time ago. Perhaps some of you read it, which is all about consciousness. And he had the audacity, or the wisdom, to refuse to actually define consciousness. So I'm not going to define mind either, following in that august tradition, but because it's a really interesting question scientifically. But there are aspects of mind that we can begin to sort of attend to and pay attention to using all sorts of instrumentation, like, non-invasive scanning methodologies, and we're beginning to do very, very interesting studies on meditation, using fMRI and quantitative EEG and so forth. And there's not going to be time for me to talk about those this afternoon, but that is happening. But my point about the mind is that the Buddhists have always considered that element of non-conceptual knowing to be another sense. Okay? But there are even more than that, because there's also the sense of proprioception. For instance, this is a remarkable sense that's not really touching, but it's knowing where the body is in time, and for that matter, in space, and for that matter, in time, moment by moment by moment. Like, I know where my hand is, even though I can't see it. But if something happened to my sense of proprioception, I wouldn't even know that I had a body. And I might not even be able to stand here unless I looked at my legs and used other neural pathways to make sure that the muscles were firing. Luckily, damage to the organism that results in total loss of proprioception is extremely rare. But Oliver Sacks did write about it in the book entitled The Man Who Mistook His Wife for a Hat. And so it gives you pause that there are senses we don't even know we have that we take totally for granted, but you would not want to lose. And then, as I write about in the book, about my father and his 8-year experience losing his mind to Alzheimer's. And he was a samurai scientist, razor-sharp mind. Just that all of us, for instance, know where we came from before we wound up in this room without having to think about it, and you know where you're going to go, and you'll be able to find your car even without really having to think about it. Although you may recruit thinking at a certain point if you have a senior moment or a junior moment. But we take an awful lot for granted. And what mindfulness is inviting us to do is start to pay attention to what might be most fundamental in our lives rather than most urgent. Okay? And if we get entrained into endless busyness, then we are at risk for not having the time, or for that matter, the sort of lenses with which to actually be in touch and know anything. Because have you had the experience, for instance, that you can see without seeing? Have you ever had that experience? Like, it's right in front of your eyes and you just don't see it until you see it. And then after you see it, you go, why didn't I see that? I mean, it's been there all the time. How about hearing? Have you ever had the experience of hearing without hearing? Of course you have. Happens in families all the time. You know? Have you ever had somebody say to you, you never listen to me? This may happen more for men than for women, I don't know. But like, you never really listen to me. You know? And you, of course, immediately take it personally and object. But it's that person's actual sort of experience that, you know, we only hear what we want to hear. A lot of time we just don't hear it. We're very good at tuning things out. But have you had the experience of being in a party with like a lot of noise and all sorts of people chattering and chattering, and somebody mentions your name in a tiny corner at the far end of the room, somehow you manage to hear that. They're talking about me. Wow, fantastic. You get this little warm feeling inside. Or what are they saying about me? And we get this cold feeling inside. So the point is that meditative practice is really about coming to our senses, both literally and metaphorically, okay? That we could actually cultivate intimacy with the ordinary and not take it so much for granted. I'm willing to put money on the fact that everybody in this room is breathing, for instance. But unless you have a very bad cold or you're choking, the chances are that you don't pay any attention to your breathing. Or unless you're a martial arts trained person or an opera singer or a wind instrument player. But the breath is an incredibly rich universe in our experience, and every single one of us right now could actually, without even shifting our posture or the tilt of our head, bring full awareness to the sensations of the breath moving in and out of the body. No one needs to teach us how to do it. It's just like, it's right here. And we can drop into awareness of breath. Can you feel it? Now, what's difficult is to keep your awareness on the breath. Because after a while, you say, well, okay, point well taken, now show me something more interesting. How long do I have to keep up this surfing on the waves of my own breath? Just feeling my breath is not that interesting. So here's a little yogic experiment you can perform and we're not going to do it here because obviously we don't have enough time to bring up that kind of aversion or distraction or desire for something else to carry us away from the breath. But if you did it for 5 minutes, you'd find that you probably interrupted yourself 100 times. That it's not so easy to just focus your mind on anything. And it's like, not that the breath has any kind of particular virtue except the obvious one. So the next time, how many of you actually would describe yourself as meditators? That meditation is some significant part in your life? Anybody? Wow, I love San Diego. Well, it's tricky to describe yourself as a meditator, actually, so be careful, because, it's just a thought. And then trouble is with that thought is then everybody else becomes a non-meditator. And that's a very bad thought, dangerous thought. Because then you've got this and that again. No, I'm a meditator. And you're not a meditator, and you'd probably be better off if you were a meditator. It's like, maybe we'd be better off if you weren't a meditator. It's like, because what the really important thing is non-attachment. That we not let these sticky personal pronouns, I, me, and mine, get caught on everything. It's like, my meditation practice. I'm getting healthier by meditating. The problem isn't with the meditating, it's with the personal pronoun laying claim to it. Okay, it's a little bit of a kind of imperialist grab, land grab, to identify, with something that we think has some virtue. But here's the experiment. The next time the breath seems really boring to you, if you were to give yourself the assignment, and I won't give it to you, but maybe then you'll do it, try sitting for 10 minutes and just writing on the waves of your breath and see what happens to your mind. And just record in your mind what's happening in your mind and see if you can, every time the mind wanders, bring it back to the breath, no matter what's on your mind. You got that? It's like simple instruction. Just stay on the breath. But without mean-spiritedness. Don't beat yourself up about it and tell yourself stories like, oh, this is hopeless. It's already wandered 20 times. I'll never be a good meditator. All of that's just crap. It's just thinking. The exercise is to just be with the breath and then notice what comes up in the mind. And if all that crap comes up, that's fine too. Because remember, mindfulness is about non-judgmental awareness, so the crap isn't crap. It's just your mind. So here's the experiment. Next time the breath becomes really boring to you, you take your thumb and push it over your right nostril. Your index finger, squeeze it over your left nostril. You purse your lips together, and you just see how long it takes for the next in-breath to become exquisitely interesting to you. because we just take the fundamentals for granted over and over and over again. You can, be a parent and not see who your children are for decades at a time. Maybe because you're just too busy and you're not home. Or maybe even when you're home, you're not home. Have you ever had that kind of intimation? Only it's so scary you suppress it, abdicate, and just read the paper. This has profound applications, and we've been studying them for the past 25 years. We're celebrating the 25th anniversary of the Stress Reduction Clinic in April in Worcester at the annual Mindfulness-Based Interventions in Medicine conference. And if I think back to 1979 when I started the Stress Reduction Clinic, I find my mind often coming up with the thought, 1979? What stress? Compared to the sort of pace at which we're living now, the expectations. I mean, I can tell you, honestly, I can get more work done in a day and better work done in a day than I used to be able to get done in a month 25 years ago. Because of all this digital 24/7 interconnectedness. Right? So, I'm not knocking it. But it comes with a price, that we are going to have to pay, because there's no saying, okay, this is interfering too much with the quality of our lives, so let's just turn back the clock. There's no turning back the clock. This is technology doesn't wait for humans, even though it all comes out of the human mind. I mean, it's got a life of its own, and it's going exponential, and we ain't seen nothing yet. So the challenge is, how many of you feel that very often, let's just take email, for instance. How many of you are on email? Okay. Now, how many of you have had the feeling sometimes that you can't live without your email, and if your computer breaks down, I mean, even for half an hour, you lose your mind, you go insane. Anybody have that experience? I'm willing to join that club. It's a disease, a dis-ease. Now, on the other hand, you can't live without the email, but have you ever had the thought, I can't live with this stuff. I mean, it's driving me crazy, because there's this expectation that, you have to respond to all these people. And it's never less people, it's always a growing number of people, and it's always important, and it's always only you can respond. And after a while, you don't have any time for your life because you're too busy responding. Get the point? And that's not just true with email, it's just true with everything. That, in a sense, we're doing from the moment the feet hit the floor in the morning. It's just how many of you have to-do lists? Anybody use a list? Did you write yourself lists to do so that you won't forget what you were supposed to do? I have a feeling there's a general dishonesty here. Let me ask that question again. How many of you write down lists of what you are supposed to do? Look at the difference in the response. It's unbelievable. We're very timid, about telling the truth, especially to ourselves. So, have you ever felt that you're just on this endless treadmill? And after a while, it's one good thing after another to do. And they're all you wouldn't give up any single one, but together they seem to sum up to more like a death sentence or a life sentence than living. Do you know what I mean? And of course, the soul or the heart or what's the deepest voices inside of us, that's too hard to bear, so we do abdicate. It's hard for me to grab the middle of a poem without going through the whole thing, but suppressed consciousness. So we could call ourselves more human doings than human beings. And it would be fairly accurate. And you have to be careful because, like, it's possible that there's a line from a Rumi poem that's 900 years old. It says, "Today, like every other day, we wake up empty and scared." Okay? How many times have you had the experience that by the moment you realized you were awake, you had to get to work, and you were late, and you had to run into the bathroom and get it all done and shout goodbye to everybody and get in the car or whatever it was, and like because you were late to get someplace else? Okay? And really, I mean, part of it is driven by fear. Fear of what your colleagues will think of you, or fear that you won't get it all done by the end of the day, which of course you won't, and you already know that, because there's no end to it. So here's a little homework to do in the bathroom, okay? The next time you're in the shower, check and see if you're in the shower. You may not be there. You may be in a meeting. Or your whole meeting may be in the shower with you. And you may be having one hell of an argument with people who are not there. But you're missing the water on the skin. Your proprioceptive action is nowhere near your awareness, so you're lathering and soaping and washing and toweling and drying and everything else with virtually like on autopilot. But this moment is your life. It's not like, well, we're living for some other moment. It's like if you sum that kind of mindlessness over time, it could be 90% of your waking life. And I use the word waking advisedly in parentheses, in quotation marks. Do you get the drift of this? And this has profound clinical implications. This is not just some kind of dime store philosophy or some new age bull, or for that matter, sort of like just a skin graft of Taoism or Buddhism to the West or anything like that. This is like the ultimate nature of human existence. Do we understand the domain of being, or do we not? Can we inhabit our lives while we have them to live as if they were worth actually knowing with some degree of intimacy so that we could live the lives that are ours to live and do actually the work that's ours to do, as opposed to being driven by a whole range of very complex motives that sometimes have us doing somebody else's work. Or we don't even know why we're doing the work. Or we got so much work, we're doing 20 things at once, and none of them are actually going very well, because human beings can't do 20 things at once for very long. Or even 2. So the next time you are on your cell phone, or like not on your cell phone, not on your phone, and you find the mind actually checking your email or sending an email, watch, notice what you're doing. The important thing isn't what you do, it's the awareness of it. Okay, it's the awareness. We've spent most of our lives learning how to think critically, right? And a lot of attention has been paid to that in our education, and we pride ourselves with being really critical thinkers. We've gotten to be such critical thinkers that we're basically thinking 24/7 with no awareness of it, and believing everything that crosses the screen of the mind is the truth. So if some of the thoughts are quite negative or depressive or anxious, we believe them, especially the ones around the personal pronouns. I'm too this, I'm not enough that. And we take that as fact. It's not fact, it's just like conditioned, patterns in the mind that have never been examined. So can we cultivate intimacy with the domain of being? Can we, in fact, be at home in our own skin? Or are we living from here up? Can we drop in on the body? Can we come to our senses, all of them, not just the head-based ones, but the body, because there's no separation. Head is part of the body. And while we can point to the body, we have a terrible time pointing to the mind. But that doesn't mean that it's not incredibly powerful. And much more powerful if we know it intimately, not just through concepts and through thought, but through awareness, which is bigger than thought. So in our educational system, for instance, were you ever told when you had to learn algebra, how many of you didn't love algebra? Raise your hands if you didn't love algebra. Okay. But weren't you told that algebra was good for you? It would help you think better? Yeah. And geometry? Anybody here not love geometry? I love geometry. But anyway, yeah, and you're told, well, this will help you to think. And everything has helped us to think, and we've become terrific thinkers. But have you ever had a course or even a teacher mention training in awareness or in attention? What if we didn't take our awareness for granted, but we started to actually learn how to inhabit it, and then when the mind went off the breath, just as an example, so there's me and the breath, there's the subject and there's the object, and then the subject is going to follow the breath and then observe that the subject can't follow the breath, that the mind has a life of its own and goes off, and then the subject decides, oh yeah, the meditation instructions bring my mind back to the breath, and you keep doing that over and over and over again. William James had something very beautiful to say about this being at the heart of any true system of education, but that it was hard to articulate it because he didn't have any idea about mindfulness. But what if we were to learn to cultivate intimacy with awareness and gradually refine our capacity for awareness? Then maybe we could see things as they actually were, hear what is relevant to be heard, smell what is relevant to be smelled, touch what is relevant to be touched, taste what is relevant to be tasted. How many times do we eat without tasting it all? Have you ever had a mindless hug? Yeah, it's like awful. Have you ever been disregarded by a physician in an office visit? Like you were there, but you weren't seen? Although, you know, in the medical records, the patient was seen by whom? You know, we train the medical students in this. Like, it's not a luxury. This is at the core of the Hippocratic contract. It's like, show up, be present for your patients. But it's easy to miss that. So it involves a certain kind of training. Could we cultivate awareness and learn to know that territory? What I would call the nowscape. So that would include, the nowscape would include the mindscape, the bodyscape, the soundscape, the landscape, the tastescape, the touchscape, the smellscape, the breathscape. So this is the challenge, and you don't have to be referred to a stress reduction clinic to do it, although, you know, there are some wonderful MBSR teachers here, and I recommend that you do it, not as kind of like remedial. This is not remedial anything. It's like, oh, I'm a basket case, I need the stress reduction clinic. This is advanced training in the art of living. This is advanced training in the art of living. And it's easy to let 10 years or, you know, our whole lives go by and just kind of miss it, as Thoreau said. And not when I came to die, he said, discover that I hadn't lived. What is the hospital and medical school and medicine all about if it's not to restore people to health? But what is health? We had a seminar, a symposium, day-long symposium at the NIH back in May. It was called Mindfulness, Meditation, and Health. I thought I'd died and gone to heaven. You know, it's like, I had no idea that in 1979 the National Institutes of Health would be holding a day-long symposium on mindfulness, meditation, and health. At the end of which, a man got up who had been a physician research investigator intramurally at the NIH for his entire career, and he said, I think we really should rename the NIH, the National Institutes of Disease. Because in point of fact, we're not really paying attention to the deep structure of what we mean when we use the word health. And although we're trying to restore people to health and understanding the disease process, an incredibly important part of it, there's something else that needs investigating. And it's incomplete if we're not holding the whole of it. I thought that was really quite remarkable that he said that. And he got a huge round of applause from the 600 people who were in attendance, which is over 10 times the number of people who attend any of the other seminars in that series, I was told. So even the NIH has woken up to the fact that there's something about this that is compelling us to pay attention. And I don't think it has to do with, like, you know, just some fad or other, as, you know, we get addicted to fads of one kind or another. But it really has to do, I think, with a deep, deep longing, a deep, deep yearning to, as Derek Walcott said, to love again the stranger who was ourselves. To greet ourselves arriving at our own door in our own mirror. To give back our hearts to ourselves. All of this, by the way, just in parenthesis, has applications way beyond the personal. It has applications to the life of institutions, to the life of societies, to the life of governments, to the life of the planet. And there's something that I think can be learned from what we've learned in mind-body medicine in the past 30, 25 years that has some profound applications, because if we mistake what's actually going on in this complex world of ours, and we therefore misdiagnose it, we will mistreat it in ways that do not really own this problematic dimension of the human mind in its unwillingness to attend to itself in ways that are open-hearted, in ways that are clear, in ways that are scientifically valid, and in ways that are, you know, ruthlessly committed to the truth. So I will stop at this point and just say, before we go into Q&A, which we can do for a bit, and just say that I really appreciate your attention. I have appreciated your attention right here. I can feel your hearing, not just your listening, but your hearing. And if any of this has touched you in any way whatsoever, my counsel would be to honor that in some way and nourish it, water those seeds. They're not coming from me, as Steve said, they're really coming from you, okay? Nobody came into this room and stayed here by accident. There must have been something that you came for, and it wasn't just to see what I look like. You know, so whatever it was that brought you here, it's deep. It's deep, because people don't just accidentally show up to hear about mindfulness. Honor it, feed it, nourish it, cultivate intimacy with it. That's what meditation practice is. Not sitting in the full lotus and breathing through one nostril and out the other, anything like that. It is living your life from moment to moment as if it really mattered. And then you discover that, as Walt Whitman observed, you're much bigger than you think you are. So whatever those personal pronouns are pointing to, it's much bigger than what you think. So thank you, folks. Well, there are many different answers to that, some funnier than others. But I'll just say a lot of it is what we call in psychology conditioning. You know, we've been entrained into particular habits of mind and habits of body that have us kind of sequestered up in the head a lot of the time, caught up in thought. There's a wonderful line from James Joyce's one of his short stories in Dubliners that goes like this: Mr. Duffy lived a short distance from his body. So that may be why. Yeah, I think that there is some element, because what is instinct? Instinct is taking things in through all the various senses and having the picture, whatever it is, that arises spontaneously, which is not just thought, okay? We use instinct in a way separate from thought, okay? Intuition. Very often in science, the breakthroughs happen after you've battered your head against the wall and you can't. You know everything there is to know and you're not making the connection. And then you drop it. You let go, and then comes up in a dream or in sleep, or just a moment of like a eureka, you know. Well, we sometimes think of that as instinct or you know, of openness, and then so you could think of instinct as another kind of sense, so to speak. And yes, you do have to honor it. Trust is another question, because you also have to be careful of your instincts. Any scientist knows that you have to watch out for you know, the ways in which you are biased to want a particular outcome. So what mindfulness does is it cultivates discernment as opposed to judging. Okay? Discernment sees, feels, smells, tastes, touches, all the different gradations between black and white, 0 and 1, this or that. Whereas judging tends to rapidly fall into, I got it, it's this, I got it, it's that. And some of the time you may have it, and it may be this or it may be that, but some of the time that whole process might mislead you. And if so, there's a little voice in the back of your mind saying, look again, look deeper, drop underneath the appearance. Maybe this isn't what it seems. That's your intuition too. And so we need to train to trust it. By trust, I mean just honor that.